Hi everyone. I hope from our last video that you are feeling inspired to make sure you've got a really great edition of whatever you're working on. And following up on that, I just want to talk about some really interesting markings in some first-rate editions that give me some clues about what composers were really trying to tell us, which may be different than what you think of, at least in a traditional way. And I've got three examples here. I've got this one by Chopin from the First Ballade, which has this strange marking in the third measure. The marking is diminuendo and then a decrescendo. Okay, we'll talk about that in a moment. Let's look at this. I've got the same kind of marking in this Brahms First Sonata. This is an important part of the piece structurally, and I've got here at measure 137. And it's marked again, diminuendo with a decrescendo. Now, turn that a little bit upside down, and in this Rachmaninoff Etude, Opus 39, number 6, in the third measure, it's marked diminuendo, and in the same measure, it has a crescendo, which seems very contradictory, right? Well, what is it? Do you want a diminuendo or a crescendo? But I think based on these things, and really based on a book that I read a couple of years ago by Roberto Poli called The Secret Life of Musical Notation. I highly recommend this book. It's going to blow your mind. It's so well researched and thoughtful, and it's going to change the way you think a lot about dynamic markings. And specifically, there was a time in my life where if I'd seen some of these markings, I would have thought, okay, diminuendo and decrescendo, and I'd think, well, the composer's really trying to get us a message here to play quieter. But there's actually, I think, a little deeper meaning here. And if you look at the Chopin with the diminuendo and the decrescendo, what I think is actually that the diminuendo is saying to play quieter, but the decrescendo is actually not in that traditional sense of playing getting softer, but actually manipulation of time. And that is so that the wider part of the decrescendo, what we might colloquially call as a hairpin, this kind of thing, at the wider part, he's actually saying this is the slowest part, and as it gets narrower, this is where it now goes back into time. And the fact that he wrote that in the same measure, that's the only way I could actually interpret it. So as I approach that, and then back in time. In the Brahms, same deal. I start with that low kind of timpani drum roll, and I'll be especially broad in time, and then I'll move forward in time after that, back into tempo. Now, the Rachmaninoff is actually, I think, the most interesting one because it's actually a diminuendo and a crescendo written in the same measure. And but I think the same thing applies in that the diminuendo is saying play quieter or get quieter, but the crescendo is doing widening of time. So I'm in preparing for this video, I actually looked at some other copies of the G minor Ballade, and it turns out that some editions, in their well-meaning attempt to clarify what Chopin was meaning by having the audacity to write these two seemingly redundant things at the same time, they got rid of one of them. And that's a serious problem because by itself, I might treat it dynamically, but in its relationship to being next to the word diminuendo, almost superimposed on top of each other, it has a very different meaning. So check out this book, The Secret Life of Musical Notation. I'm not getting any kickbacks for this endorsement, but I think you'll really enjoy it. And it'll again reinforce this importance of having a first-rate copy of your score so that you can show the greatest version of truth, your version of the truth that the composer had written first to you and then you to your audience.